Chosen one. Look around. This moment isn't an accident. You didn't stumble here by chance. The fact that you're reading this means you already carry something the world has tried to dim but couldn't extinguish. You are not ordinary. You are not here to blend in or bow down. You are here because you've been set apart, because you have a fire in you that refuses to die quietly. Let me tell you something. They underestimated you. They counted on you doubting yourself, staying quiet, playing small. But here you are anyway, standing taller, sharper, more awake than they ever expected. That makes you dangerous in the best way possible. This space is for you, for the ones who don't just survive the storm, but learn how to command it. For the ones who are done apologizing for being too much, too bold, too unshakable. You've already lived through what others couldn't imagine. And yet you're still here, breathing proof that you can't be broken. So lean in. Feel this. Let it sink into your bones. You don't need permission to take up space. You don't need validation to shine. You don't need approval to speak the truth. You are the reminder that power doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing exactly who you are. Get ready. This isn't just a conversation. It's a call to step fully into what you are always meant to be. Welcome to the room, the chosen ones. Let's light it up. Looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. Some assume intimidation is clumsy and loud, but in reality, it's a quiet craft honed through observation. It targets those who seem to shrink under scrutiny, who fidget under tension, who mistake quiet endurance for safety. That is how control is built, on unspoken hesitations, on the invisible weight of wanting to belong. Yet every mechanism falters eventually, and it faltered when faced with an unexpected calm. When the familiar bait was thrown, nothing happened. No scramble, no desperate explaining, no defensive retreat, just steady, watchful presence. While the trap was being set, the game was already over. Beneath the bluster, the fragile strings became visible. The hunger to dominate, the craving for validation, the fear of irrelevance. That realization burned brighter than any retort could. Power in such moments is not measured in decibels or muscle, but in the refusal to be moved, in a quiet clarity that rattles every false assumption. Bullies speak in sharp tones, designed to unnerve, but nothing unsettles more than someone who no longer needs to prove themselves, someone whose confidence has already weathered worse storms. Predators often flourish where nobody names what's happening. That hush is their refuge, their camouflage. They rely on others averting their eyes, worrying more about keeping the surface smooth than about confronting what festers beneath it. And usually, that strategy works. People convince themselves that silence is safer, that speaking only deepens the wound, that being invisible will shield them. Until one day, the pattern shatters, not because of shouting or spectacle, but because of an unshakable voice calling everything by its name. The disruption wasn't loud, it was precise. It peeled away the pretense and left the manipulation exposed in the open air. That clarity rippled outward, unsettling more than just the perpetrator, waking the quiet observers from their uneasy sleep. When illusions collapse, panic follows. The attempts to discredit, to isolate, to twist reality intensify. But the dynamic had already shifted. Silence, once mistaken for protection, revealed itself as complicity. And once that illusion was gone, people could no longer unknow what they saw. It was never about heroism, it was simply about refusing to pretend anymore. And that refusal gave others permission to question what they thought was unchangeable. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. Some carry themselves as though the room already belongs to them, tossing out subtle traps disguised as kindness, dripping their words with invisible hooks meant to catch the unaware. These maneuvers, which had once bent others to their will, suddenly dissolved when they encountered an unshakable presence. Every strategy meant to confuse, to blur the line between right and wrong, simply fell flat. Not because of defiance, but because of an unclouded awareness that refused to be swayed. Where they once sowed doubt, they found only silence. Where they expected panic, they found someone calmly unweaving their illusions. They were not prepared for a mind that could sidestep their maze entirely and see the exit before it was even lit. The loudest voice in the room didn't come from words, but from composure itself. What startled them wasn't resistance, but the quiet dismantling of every mechanism they relied on. No raised tone, no harsh reply, just the steady undoing of the entire performance. Control often grows where confusion thrives. It feeds on hesitation and misdirection, on twisting someone's story so subtly they can no longer find the edges. Yet here, every attempt to blur reality was met with clarity sharper than any argument could provide. No energy was wasted trying to match their theatrics. Instead, the game itself was ended. A single unwavering stance was enough to show how little weight their authority actually carried. The more they pressed, the more they revealed their own emptiness. It became impossible for them to ignore that they weren't facing just another opponent, but a force that refused to be baited into the dance at all. What unnerved them most wasn't being opposed. It was the realization that their power could dissolve in the presence of someone who had nothing left to lose, nothing left to prove, and no need to bargain for respect. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. Some believe that pain makes a person fragile, and so they stalk those who seem tender, mistaking gentleness for an open wound. They circle like it's easy to crush someone quiet, seeking cracks to widen and old injuries to reopen. But what they couldn't see was that the softness in front of them wasn't weakness at all. It was strength refined in the fire of prior battles. What they assumed was untested innocence was in fact a tempered resolve. Every scar they hoped to exploit had already been claimed as proof of endurance. They tried to strike where they thought the foundation was weakest and discovered instead that those places had long since hardened. The usual tricks, pressing on old memories, whispering doubts, trying to twist dignity into shame, found no purchase. Where they expected someone to break, they encountered someone already whole. The calm refusal to be rattled unsettled them more than anger ever could. They were used to seeing fear glint in the eyes of those they cornered, but here they saw only steady recognition, a quiet refusal to flinch. No plea, no collapse, no desperate search for escape, just an unspoken boundary they could neither cross nor understand. They thought they were the storm, but instead they met the mountain. When their illusions slipped and their usual weapons failed to wound, panic set in, not because harm had come to them, but because harm could no longer reach the one standing before them. What they failed to anticipate was that someone who has already walked through darkness and come out intact cannot be conquered by shadows. Some carry themselves like their authority is carved from stone, projecting menace with every gesture, as though the entire room bends at their signal. For a time, that illusion holds. People tiptoe, avoid eye contact, diminish themselves, just to stay out of the spotlight. But the spell only works as long as someone believes in it. And then someone arrives who simply doesn't. No shouting, no contest, just quiet refusal. That single act of standing unshaken turns their fortress into scaffolding, exposing how much of it was only ever smoke. They puff up, expecting obedience, but their entire presence begins to look like a costume once nobody claps for the show. It wasn't defiance that unraveled them, it was indifference. Their grandeur dimmed because no one leaned away. No one offered the fear it needed to grow. The room began to notice what you noticed. The cracks, the empty bravado, the desperation behind each dramatic pause. Without the audience feeding the narrative, the structure of control collapsed under its own weight. Where once every gesture carried intimidation, now it looked rehearsed, even absurd. Calmness illuminated what they never wanted revealed, that what they called strength was only borrowed from everyone else's silence. The unspoken truth became visible. Authority constructed on fear survives only as long as permission is granted. Withdraw that, and it falls apart. This unassuming act of withdrawing changed everything, not through confrontation, but through clarity. The atmosphere shifted, the weight in the air dissipated, and for the first time, others could see how shallow the hold had always been. They were left with nothing but noise, loud but powerless, because the illusion no longer held sway. That was the real devastation. Not that someone resisted, but that someone revealed there was never anything to resist in the first place. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. Some believe they're strategists, crafting intricate traps in the mind, believing they're steps ahead. They arrived thinking they were sparring with someone naive, unprepared for the subtle wars played out in silence. But what they didn't know was that this opponent had already endured seasons of deceit, so deep and twisting they had learned to read between shadows. Long before this game began, the rules were already memorized. Betrayals had already taught how to navigate confusion. Lies had already sharpened perception to catch distortion before it rooted. By the time they attempted their tricks, the ground was already mapped and mined. When they planted doubt, it withered on arrival. When they tried to stir turmoil, they found only unshakable composure, staring back. Because mastery over oneself does not emerge from ease. It is forged through storms where no one is watching. Every test they delivered had already been faced before, in subtler and more dangerous forms. Every ploy they used had already been dismantled and catalogued. Their confusion came not from being opposed, but from being seen through so clearly they could no longer find footing. And the quiet confidence that emerged was not just personal. It carried something larger, a dismantling, not just of this single exchange, but of an entire pattern they had counted on. What they brought was familiar chaos, but what they met was a quiet force that rewrote the script entirely. Their moves were predictable. The outcome was inevitable. They left not defeated by resistance, but undone by something deeper. A presence that had long since transcended their games and walked into the room carrying its own unshakable truth. Some become unsettled when they meet someone unwilling to fit the outline they've drafted, someone who refuses to contort themselves to ease tension. Most prefer to be tolerated than to stand alone, softening their edges to appease others and swallowing their words to avoid discord. That is precisely what those who manipulate count on. Compliance disguised as politeness, silence worn as survival. But every pattern fractures eventually, and it fractured here. No need arose to accept false peace at the cost of selfhood, no urge to barter dignity for temporary belonging. The pretense of harmony dissolved because the price tag was too high. The offer was seen clearly for what it was, a bargain of quiet surrender, disguised as mutual respect. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. Those who rely on deference rarely anticipate someone who values authenticity above approval. That unexpected clarity reveals their illusion and unsettles everyone around them. Rejection was not feared, nor was exclusion treated as a threat. It became a shield. Attempts to shame or exile fell flat because nothing was more precious than remaining whole. And when they attempted to close their circle, the door was left swinging behind without regret. That was not mere defiance, but a kind of liberation, unshaken by gossip or misunderstanding. The fear that holds others hostage had no foothold here. The willingness to be misunderstood became armor, and the willingness to be disliked became freedom. While others bent themselves to stay accepted, the line was already drawn, unmovable. That shift in the air spoke louder than resistance. Control falters when rejection no longer wounds. Many equate volume with authority, filling spaces with clamor, competing for attention with frantic energy, mistaking visibility for power. That chaos suited them, and they knew how to move within it, thriving on others' desperation to be acknowledged. Yet in the midst of their noise, someone arrived who carried presence without asking for permission. They expected eagerness to impress, but none came. Instead of chasing recognition, calm certainty entered and altered the entire rhythm of the room. Quiet resolve was mistaken for arrogance at first, even mocked as passivity. But underneath, it rattled their footing because it revealed their desperation by contrast. What truly disarmed them was not a challenge, but the unbothered ease of someone who didn't care to compete at all. No games, no bargaining, no scrambling to fit the mold. Just a quiet current that made their practiced bravado look shallow. Without seeking favor, that quiet force disrupted their entire stage. Authority was not claimed, it was evident. It didn't wear a name badge or demand applause. It simply existed, and that made their performance look thin and frantic by comparison. The ones who spoke the loudest began to falter, unable to ignore that while they chased attention, someone else was already commanding the moment by simply being. They came to understand that nothing about this was an act, that this presence carried the weight of scars, clarity, and a purpose too anchored to be moved by their theatrics. No seats were fought for. The whole table shifted. No words were wasted trying to impress. The silence spoke more loudly than the shouting ever could. Eventually, even the most restless voices fell quiet, realizing this was not just another visitor to the room, but the quiet force that came to redefine it entirely. Some moments redefine a space rather than simply resolve a conflict. When the stance was taken, it wasn't just about proving a point or countering an insult. It was about embodying something larger, something rooted. The steadiness carried into the room wasn't noisy or theatrical. It settled like a weight in the air, undeniable and unshakable. What changed wasn't only the direction of a single exchange, but the undercurrent of the whole atmosphere. That stillness became a spark, People nearby felt it without quite knowing why. The way silence suddenly grew heavy, the way attention sharpened, as if everyone remembered something they'd long buried. Others, who had quietly endured and complied for too long, found themselves pausing mid-thought, questioning what they'd normalized to keep things smooth. This wasn't done to disrupt for the sake of chaos, but to hold a mirror high enough for others to catch their own reflections. Even those who had been watching from the sidelines began noticing how fragile the illusion of control really was once it was named. The shift was felt before it was spoken. The energy of fear that had sustained the oppressor started unraveling, thread by thread. There was no shouting, no grand display, just a quiet certainty that carried more weight than any threat could. What was confronted that day wasn't just a single figure, but an old pattern, a habit of silence dressed up as safety. That tension broke, and something freer seeped into the cracks left behind. Long after the moment passed, others found themselves making braver choices, not because they were told to, but because they remembered they could. And the echo of that choice kept moving outward, far beyond that room. There are those who survive by crafting personas so convincing they go unchallenged. They layer their performance with charm, authority, and carefully timed sympathy, like actors who believe their role is reality. For years it fools people, because the surface is polished, the delivery seamless. But the truth has a way of cutting through even the thickest disguise, especially when someone arrives who isn't looking at the show but listening deeper. What everyone else reacted to, their tone, their words, the staged kindness, meant nothing here, because behind all of it, something faint but undeniable betrayed them. Their performance didn't falter on its own. It dissolved when someone called it for what it was. There was no need for accusation or spectacle, just an observation spoken plainly that made the entire facade collapse in on itself. That kind of clarity doesn't come from suspicion or gossip. It's forged by having learned how to tell what's real through pain and practice. The mask didn't slip. It was rendered useless the moment it was truly seen. They couldn't hide because the atmosphere shifted in a way they couldn't control anymore. Their own tools betrayed them. The story they constructed fell flat because the lie could no longer hold its shape when faced with that kind of presence. No stage was needed, no crowd necessary. The unraveling happened quietly but completely. What was revealed was not simply their weakness, but the hollow foundation they'd been standing on all along. And once everyone glimpsed the reality beneath the mask, no amount of pretending could make it fit the same way again. Some people expect others to orbit around them, assuming that status and applause make them untouchable. They rely on others lowering themselves just to stand close, mistaking proximity for meaning. They assume the crowd will always lean in, offering silent approval in exchange for belonging. That's the dynamic they've built, a room full of bent spines, quiet admiration, and fake smiles designed to keep favor. But not everyone moves that way. The awe they counted on never arrived. The flattery they expected never came. Their grandeur was met with stillness, their performance with a flat gaze that saw through every polished detail. Where others saw brilliance, you saw glass. Where others heard wisdom, you heard noise. What rattled them wasn't rejection, but how unimpressed you were by the glitter they thought was gold. They felt the shift when you refused to clap at the right moment, when you didn't mirror the reactions they've grown used to. People who build their confidence from admiration falter when someone declines to participate. That quiet refusal exposed them more than shouting ever could. The audience they expected had vanished. And what was left was someone seeing them clearly, unclouded by charm. The more they tried to impress, the clearer the cracks became. The confidence they projected was nothing more than a stage light. The closer you looked, the more obvious the emptiness became. They weren't used to someone refusing to kneel, not with cruelty, but with clarity. That clarity became a quiet rebellion. It unsettled them deeply, because nothing threatens a hollow throne like someone who doesn't believe it exists. There are people who move through life as though consequences are myths. They count on fear and exhaustion, keeping others quiet. They step on people without hesitation, assuming no one dares to stop them. It worked for so long, they began to believe they were untouchable, until they weren't, until the day they faced someone who didn't play along. What they encountered wasn't anger, but precision. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about drawing a boundary they couldn't cross. Their usual tactics fell flat because the ground had already shifted beneath them. They misread the situation entirely, believing it was just another easy victory. What they didn't see was the force standing before them wasn't fueled by revenge, but by something much deeper. That's why their facade collapsed. The quiet resistance in front of them was more than personal. It was a reckoning. Their habits, once unnoticed, suddenly became glaring. The story they told about themselves began to fray as others started paying attention to what they'd ignored before. They didn't just lose control over one person. The air around them changed, and everyone began to see differently. What followed couldn't be undone. No shouting, no threats. Just the truth landing where it needed to. Impossible to deny. Even those who once defended them couldn't look away anymore. They tried to dismiss it, but the damage was already done. Not to you, but to the illusion they'd been living in. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the moment they realized they weren't immune to the very thing they mocked: accountability. They'd grown so used to walking away clean that they forgot there would come a time when the pattern stopped working. That time came quietly, with someone who stood still but carried enough weight to tip the entire balance.